Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is Russ and welcome to the Mythic Plus version of my Subtlety 9.1.5 guides. I'll just start by saying that if you missed out on my other guide, or if at any point during this you feel like you want to explore the single target rotation a little bit more, or you're interested in raiding on Subtlety Rogue, then I will leave a link to my other raiding single target guide down below. I'll put it on screen for you now as well, and I'll put it at the end of the video. So today we're going to be focusing a little bit more on Cleave and AoE, along with any other kind of like Mythic Plus specific things that you can think of. So that includes, you know, different talent choices that we take for Mythic Plus, and also like anima powers that we're going to be using in the dungeons, things like that, along with like any little small things like changes of stats and cooldown usage and stuff like that. I hope to leave you with a better understanding of how Subtlety works by the end of this guide. So if it did help in any way, make sure that you do like the video, and more importantly, let me know down in the comments below how much it helped you, or what specific thing it helped you with. I'm trying to gauge kind of like where people need the most help so I can focus on that for future videos. I know there are a lot of other guides out there which generally just kind of like throw information at you, and quite often I feel like people leave the video not really understanding why they're making those decisions, but they just are kind of equipped with all that knowledge. So hopefully by the end of this video you'll understand why you're pressing the buttons that you're being told to press. So before we do jump into the video, I'll just quickly plug my Twitch up there. If you are interested in hanging out or getting to know me or asking me anything or whatever, just having a good time, then feel free to check out the live stream over on Twitch. I'll also leave a link for that down below. So for the talents, we're going to be largely running the same as in the raid, with a couple of exceptions. The first being premeditation in the level 15 row. Basically what this one's going to do, after entering stealth, your next shadow strike grants up to 10 seconds of slice and dice and generates 2 additional combo points if slice and dice is active. What this is going to be doing for you is basically keeping your slice and dice active without you actually having to press the button yourself, and it's just going to kind of passively refresh itself as you do your rotation. And because we don't have to do this, it's going to give us more global cooldowns that we can actually use on our Shuriken storms and our black powders, finishes, whatever finishes we're using during the dungeon. Now the tooltip does say after entering stealth, but it is also the first shadow strike of every shadow dance. So this will apply on your first shadow strike when you come out of stealth at the start of a pool, the first shadow strike of every shadow dance that you do, and also if you use a vanish and a shadow strike from vanish. So basically one less thing to worry about being slice and dice, so we can keep our ruptures up a bit easier, and we can also use a lot more spenders on our eviscerates if it's small target cleave, or our black powders if it's large target cleave. Now for the level 25 row, you're just going to be running Shadow Focus. It's pretty much the best one in this row. The only time you'd maybe take Night Stalker is like huge amounts of AoE, but I would never use it in M+ anyway. All it's going to do is make your abilities cost 20% less energy while you're inside of Shadow Dance. So that's good on bosses, for the same reason as it is in the raid. And if you're maybe energy starving on like small cleave packs, it's just going to help you stop energy starving so you can keep your ruptures and things going like that. Now in the level 30 row, absolutely no contest here. We are going to run Deeper Stratagem for the exact same reason as we do in the raid. Basically just having that 6 combo points is just going to give us that extra buffer. Not only are we getting 5% increased damage on our finishers, of which we'll be using a lot, but on AoE and things like that, where sub really shines, we're practically drowning in combo points anyway. So just being able to have an extra combo point go inside of every finisher, and that finisher hit harder again on top of that, it's just going to be doing so much work. And not only that, it's also going to have that interaction with shadow techniques, again giving you the extra 1 combo point buffer that I mentioned, so that we're just generally wasting less combo points. Now in a level 35 talent, again cheat death, pretty much just does what it says on the tin. It can absolutely save your ass. Think of any situation where maybe you accidentally find yourself standing in a frontal, or maybe being a bit too greedy, and the run back in Mythic Plus is not so hard. Now in the level 40 row, I take Night Terrors. The reason being this is going to put a slow onto my Shuriken Storm, meaning that I don't actually have to play Crippling Poison in any composition where I wouldn't have slows. If you're playing with something like a Frost Mage, and it doesn't matter too much because they're usually going to have the pack locked down with slows anyway if your tank does need to kite. But if you ever find yourself in a composition where you don't have access to slows, your gut feeling is going to be wanting to put on Crippling Poison to help out. But by taking Night Terrors, it's going to mean that you don't have to use Crippling Poison, and you can instead keep going with your usual Numbing Poison. And what that's going to do is, reduce the mob's attack speed by 15% and casting speed by 15%, which could help, your tank out with melee hits, which is especially useful in things like Necrotic And any kind of caster's ability, maybe there's a big AoE or something that goes off every now and then, having that numbing poison on is just going to reduce the overall damage that your party is going to be taking. So really undervalued thing, I think. Now at level 45, same as raiding again, we're going to be playing Enveloping Shadows. It just kind of makes the spec work, and there's no way you'd ever replace it, not in this meta, probably not in this expansion, to be honest. This talent really just brings the whole spec together with the whole having 2 charges of Shadow Dance, and also, the extra cooldown reduction. Now going into the last row, this is where we're going to be seeing the second change from the raiding loadout, and we're going to be picking up Shuriken Tornado here. Now this is quite an interesting ability. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, so you're going to be overlapping it with every other Symbols of Death, and basically what it does is it's going to wind up these 4 Shuriken Storms, which is the normal AoE generator, and it's going to fire them back to back 1 second apart. Now the ability costs 60 energy, but ideally you're going to want to use it with about 80 energy, so you're going to have enough energy left over to actually use the finishers between every single Shuriken Storm that it fires. Basically this is big AoE damage. On AoE situations, you're going to be fitting in a black powder between every single Shuriken Storm, and I'll tell you a bit more about how that works later on in the rotation part of the guide. But this is basically going to give you huge AoE burst, because you're essentially going to be able to fit 4 max combo point black powders into a Symbols of Death every minute. So your Soulbinds and Conduits are going to be largely dependent on which covenant you are. I would personally highly recommend either playing Venthyr or Kyrian. Now I'll put on screen for you now kind of like the 5 potency conduits you'll have to choose from. Those are Lashing Scars, Deeper Daggers, Perforated Veins, Stiletto Staccato, and Planned Execution. Now you're always going to be playing Deeper Daggers. That one is just going to increase your shadow damage across the board that you do, and that is applying to every finish that you do on a target with Find Weakness, where it does an extra portion of shadow damage. This will be up all the time because you'll always be using an Eviscerate or a Black Powder within 8 seconds of the last. The next most important one is going to be Lashing Scars if you are playing Venthyr. Just going to buff your flagellation even more, especially if you run the Obedience legendary. Very important because you're going to start with those 5 extra stacks. Plus extra damage is always nice. And then for your last conduit slot, you're going to be choosing between Perforated Veins, Stiletto Staccato, and Planned Execution. Now personally I would go with Stiletto Staccato so you can get more uses of Shadow Blades, which again is going to scale with your Deeper Daggers, I guess, and just generally going to mean that you're going to have your cooldown ready to go, a lot more packs. It's just going to reduce the cooldown of your Shadow Blades every time that you proc your Shadow Techniques. You can't take as big of advantage as you can on single target with it because you're not going to have as high uptime because you'll have time in the dungeons where you're running between packs. But it will get your Shadow Blades up quite a lot more often, which over the course of a dungeon is a lot more casts. Planned Execution is okay, but it does fall off in AoE situations, and Perforated Veins is pretty much a single target one, so I wouldn't think it was that useful for Mythic Plus. So I'll put a cheat sheet on the screen for you again, showing which conduits you'll take with each different Soulbind, all the different covenants. My priority personally would be Lashing Scars if you're Venthyr, and then Deeper Daggers, and then Stiletto Staccato. If you're not playing Venthyr, I'd go with a Soulbind that has only 2 potency slots, and I would run with Deeper Daggers and Stiletto Staccato. As far as stats and gear go, it's pretty simple, same as for the rest of the sub. You want to be focusing on crit and verse. Mastery and Haste are not that far behind. I'll put a little infographic up on the screen for you now, but Mastery is a little bit better than Haste. You can see kind of like how the different stats scale with different item levels and gear and stuff. So you just want to be focusing on as much crit and verse as you can, but sim yourself to be sure and put a focus on eye level. For stuff like trinkets, I always run with a Vial of Putrefaction from Plaguefall, and then for your second trinket you can kind of mix and match what you want. The trinket from the Guardian boss in the raid is quite good, so is the Decanter of Ender's Howling. And if you're not running Stiletto Staccato for any reason, then the Quantum Device is quite good because it will line up with your Shadow Blades. And onto the Legendaries. As I said earlier in the guide, I highly recommend you play either Venthyr or Kyrian. If you are playing Venthyr, you can go Obedience, and that's just going to buff up your flagellation and make it a bit more beefy. It's really good on AoE because it's giving you like 15% extra verse for your AoE rotation and all those black powders, so that's very nice. And if you're not playing Venthyr, I'd probably recommend just going Finality. It's just really easy to use, completely passive. You don't have to really think about it. And it just scales very, very well on Cleave and AoE. It's just going to be buffing every other finisher that you do. As far as domination sockets go in Mythic Plus, these set bonuses do not work. So you're just going to be wanting to run, if you can, the DPS one of each of the magic schools. So that'll be the Shard of Core for the Frost, the Shard of Beck for the Blood, and the Shard of Dees for Unholy. This is the part of the guide now that's going to contain the most meat. I'll be going over the button presses that you'll be doing pretty much second by second, all throughout the dungeon, on all the different kind of sizes of pulls that you'll be doing throughout. As I mentioned earlier, I do have a counterpart to this video, which is the Subtlety Rogue raiding guide. Now, in that video, I do go a bit more in depth on the single target rotation. So if there's anything that you don't quite understand, or you feel like you need just that little bit of extra information, then it will be in the rotation section of that video. I will leave that one linked down below again. But in general, subtlety can be broken down into 3 sections, those being buff up time, resource management, and cooldown usage. Now, while these are all still very important in a Mythic Plus setting, you can get away with a little bit more than you could in a raiding environment, just because quite often you will be doing a lot of AoE, and the more targets that you have, generally the rotation gets a bit easier. Up to the point where on like a big AoE, you're basically just going to be pressing 2 buttons. But there is kind of a priority system that you'll go by when it comes to your builders and spenders. And that does change quite dramatically depending on how many targets you're engaging. So I'll try to go over it as clearly as I can. It does get a little bit confusing. I'll try to use information and graphics on screen to make that a little bit easier. And then I'll finish with a summary section as well, where I'll just kind of like put everything as like a bit of a cheat sheet. So maybe you can screenshot that one or something. So let's first talk about Slice and Dice. You're going to be wanting to keep up Slice and Dice all the time on up to 6 targets. So that one's nice and easy. That one can get refreshed again by premeditation, or if you're on an AoE situation like 5 or 6 targets, you could just chuck 1 Slice and Dice in and it will last you for like 40 seconds or so. So cleaving is generally where most people go wrong, and Rupture is one of those abilities that is commonly misused. You'll be wanting to keep it up on about 3 targets if you can. And at 3 targets as well is when you'll start switching off Eviscerate as your kind of like dump to Black Powder, right? So on 3 targets, you'll be wanting to Rupture all 3 targets and then use Black Powder for any leftover combo points which aren't refreshing Slice and Dice. And your builder for that will be Shuriken Storm always. And then about 4 targets or more, that's when the rotation gets quite a lot easier, and you'll basically just be switching to 2 buttons, which is just alternating between Shuriken Storm as your builder and Black Powder as your spender. Now there is still a little bit of nuance as well at like 1 to 2 targets with Shuriken Storm usage. It's one of those abilities that it probably doesn't make a huge amount of difference over like the course of a dungeon, though it will add up. So Backstab, you will only ever use it on 1 single target, right? As soon as you get to 2 or more targets, you'll switch to Shuriken Storm as your builder. At 3 or more targets, you will always Shuriken Storm as your builder, and at 2 targets, outside of a Shadow Dance, you will Shuriken Storm as a builder, but inside a Shadow Dance, you will be still using Shadow Strike. Now I know that's a little bit confusing, so I'll put all that up on the screen for you. It is quite simple once you get used to it. Quite often you will just be spamming Black Powder all dungeon, and that's quite fun. I don't know, each their own. I find it quite soothing, I guess. I don't know, it's very easy. You can just like zone out. You just have to, you can watch your positioning, just spamming Shuriken Storm, Black Powder, Shuriken Storm, Black Powder. I have it on E and Shift E, so I'm just like running around making sure that I'm positioned between the most amount of mobs that I can be, and obviously make sure that you're melee hitting your main target. That's just extra free damage. But as I said, cleaving is where most people go wrong. So it's about keeping up your ruptures and dropping them out of your rotation when you get to the amount of targets that you should be doing that. Again, that is 4. And yeah, just try and utilize your symbols of death when you can, especially with that Shuriken Tornado. And you should be absolutely good for like most of the trash. When it comes to bosses, again, you probably want to be looking at that more in-depth single target rotation, because you don't want to be falling behind on bosses. Subtlety definitely shines on mass AoE, but it still can put out really, really good boss damage. Competitive to keep up with the rest of your group and most classes there. So you will want to make sure that you don't just leave that by the wayside, and you do want to put a bit of emphasis on learning that single target rotation as well. Now, Shadow Dances don't really matter too much on AoE, as you're drowning in combo points, they'll be resetting all the time. and they don't really provide you too much value outside of your shadow strikes anyway. But in general, you kind of want to save them for when the pack starts dying, and then you're going to be switching to Shadow Dance to put out some single target. Something to note about Subtlety as well is it has some of the best funnel in the game, so you can use those extra targets around you. If you have a priority target in a pack, a Shard of Halkias in the Halls of Atonement is a very good example of this. If you have extra mobs around you that you can essentially use to just generate a lot of combo points with Shuriken Storms, you can actually just use the Shuriken Storms to generate 6 points every time, and then just funnel eviscerates instead of black powders into like your priority target. So those Shards of Halkias, for example, they do have to die because they do a lot of damage, especially on higher fortified keys. And while spamming black powder might do more damage overall and look cool on the meters, essentially it kind of is pad. I know that those ads do have to die, but because you have this massive utility as a rogue to just funnel eviscerates into that priority target, you'll be actually helping your group a lot more and being much more of a team player by deciding when you should be funneling damage and when you can just spam AoE. So that's just something to pay attention to. Maybe you'll get better over time at making those kind of judgment calls on when you know that you can just do AoE, or when something really needs to die and your group might be struggling with a particular mob or a piece of trash or something. There are a little bit of cheese mechanics you can do this on. Anything where you can get combo points on stuff that doesn't really do much damage to your party, you can pull them with a boss, and then you can just get big funnel on like a big tyrannical week or something. I also want to touch on Shuriken Tornado. Now basically this ability, you want to be pairing it with Symbols of Death. So that'll be every other Symbols of Death, you will pair it with your Shuriken Tornado. It's going to give you huge amounts of AoE burst. And the way that it works is once you press the button, you'll have like a short wind up, about a second or so, and then it will start spinning a Shuriken Storm, a Shuriken Storm, a Shuriken Storm, a Shuriken Storm. And as you see, I kind of paused between each time I said that, and that is the space in which you will use a finisher. So if you're going for funnel damage, you want to be using a finisher like Eviscerate, so that you can funnel down into one target 4 eviscerates really quickly inside of a symbol, so they're doing a lot of damage. And if you're just going for big AoE, then you want to be making sure that you fit a black powder in between each one of those Shuriken Storms. Now there is a weak aura to help you with this. I'll link it down below. Personally, I don't use it, but I did to kind of like learn how the ability works, kind of like a training wheels, I guess. But I just got used to the wind up and then fitting in a finisher between every single Shuriken Storm. But yeah, that is about it, guys. That's all I can think of going over. Again, if you need help with the rotation and things like that, I know I've pointed to it many times, but I do have that other video on Subtlety Raiding Guide, so do check that one out. I'll leave it up there for you guys. Make sure that you swing by the stream, and please do like the video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon for the other specs, and until next time, peace.